we are good to start. So, hello everyone. Very warm welcome from my side. This feels strange and good. Side event again. And welcoming all of you in Bonn. I'm Soenke Kreft. I'm leading the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, and I have the pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's side event. And what we try to achieve, so the name of the side event is En route to COP27, Key Moments and Climate Vulnerable Expectations on Climate and Disaster Finance. And what we try to achieve in the next 1.5 hours is to talk about the why and the what and the how. The why do we need more action on loss and damage? Why do we need more action on climate and disaster risk finance? The what, we have seen many initiatives being created. We have seen progress over the past years, but we can also agree that not enough progress has been achieved so far. So we want to discuss concrete instruments and also the how, what can be done next in terms of political milestones, but also in terms of technical operationalizations. We'll start the event with some content input, and then we will have like a moderated discussion among my fellow panelists. And towards the end of the session, we also have a question-answer segment where you can ask questions to us and to the individuals on the panel. And maybe before I start, I would quickly hand over to Sara and Denise to introduce the convening organizations. Sara, over to you.
Thank you, Soenke. Hi, everyone. My name is Sara from the V20 Secretariat. And just some background on the V20, it was created in 2015, just a few months before the Paris Agreement, in order to translate the political agenda into real economic outcomes. It was founded by the Climate Vulnerable Forum, and now the presidency of the CVF and the V20 is vested in the Republic of Ghana, and the membership stands 55 climate vulnerable countries. And I think it's also important context to mention that the V20, in close cooperation with the G20 presidency at the time, launched the Inter-Resilience Global Partnership in 2017. And this was under the G20 presidency of Germany and the V20 presidency of Ethiopia. And with that, I can pass on to Denise.
Thank you, Sara. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Denise Fontanilla, Associate for Policy Advocacy of the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities. We are an international climate and energy policy group based in the Philippines. We provide tools to help governments and communities advance climate resilience and low-carbon development. We are proud to have been supporting the Secretariat of the Climate Vulnerable Forum and the Vulnerable 20 Group of Finance Ministers since the Philippine Presidency in 2014. And we are also very happy to have collaborated with the V20, other groups in the publication and release of yesterday's loss and damage report, among other initiatives.
Okay. Thank you, Sara and Denise. And I also quickly introduce MCII, the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, the third convening organization of today. MCII works on climate risk insurance and financial protection approaches in general. Was actually launched in response to discussions happening here at the UNFCCC. Insurance is one of the words in the Climate Convention of 1992. And we are a non-profit think tank. We work on policy and public sector strategy. We also have teams working on risk analytics and concrete implementation. And we also technical support organizations to the V20 group, and in that function facilitating the discussions of today, and of course very happy to have you all here. Okay, I think we can start with the first segment. I would hand over to Sara to start us off. You launched a very interesting report yesterday, and maybe you can start painting the picture for us this afternoon.
Thanks, Soenke. Maybe we can go to the first slide. So this is a copy of the report. We only have 2 copies here with us, but we will make sure to share the links with everybody. But it think it showed analysis from 2000 to 2019 on economic losses in the V20. And what we find from the data is that climate change has eliminated 1/5 of the wealth of the V20 over the last 2 decades. So this translates to the V20 could have been and would have been 20% wealthier today had it not been for climate change and the losses it incurred. So in aggregate dollar terms, this translates to approximately $525 billion because of climate change's temperature and precipitation patterns effects. And for the most at-risk country, meaning the top 10% of the worst affected V20 economies, the economic losses were more than twice as much, exceeding 51% of all growth since the year 2000. And so this means that the most at-risk climate vulnerable economies would have been twice as wealthy today had it not been for climate change. And if we go to the next slide. So nearly all V20 economies have already warmed to mean temperatures that are far beyond what is optimal for generating economic growth. And thus they incur economic losses instead. Given that warming is set to progress to 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next decade, and even as adaptation accelerates, economic losses would continue to increase. And so this means that adaptation would need to accelerate at a phenomenal rate to prevent loss and damage at the current levels. However, there is some good news. The report does highlight, an analysis shows that we have evidence now that international support supplied to V20 economies affected by extremes can diminish the negative macroeconomic effect, underscoring the importance of funding losses and damages. And just for additional context, across the V20, there's about a 98% financial protection gap. And so international efforts like the Inter-Resilience Global Partnership and the G7-led Global Shield can bring financial protection to 500 million poor and vulnerable by 2025. And in the meantime, the V20 is pioneering a loss and damage funding program that can hopefully bring much needed support to communities to deal with loss and damage happening every day. Through this, the CVF and the V20 together aim to bring the experience of this as an example program to COP27 to support the loss and damage work of the UNFCCC. And with that, I'll pass back to Soenke.
Thank you, Sara, for these insights, and very, very strong analysis, and really also showing what the challenges are for the V20 countries. And I mean, this is a double whammy. We already discussed this earlier on, that V20 economies now on facing several challenges, including, for example, still the global COVID pandemic, but also climate risks. I want to now come to a second paper, and we like to use this occasion to actually launch it as MCII. We have, over the past weeks, commissioned and also co-written a paper on rethinking the climate and disastrous finance agenda. This effort actually came about an experience we had in Glasgow, where we also realized that yes, this is very much on the agenda, the topic on loss and damage finance, but not all the actors are actually knowing on what's going on within the UNFCCC. So what are also the processes and the instruments being available through the UNFCCC, but especially also outside of the UNFCCC. And we really wanted to bring all the different topics together, and so we asked Thomas Hirsch, who cannot be with us today and present the paper in detail, to undertake interviews with many actors and to map the overarching CDFI architecture some of the emerging trends and also some of the policy recommendations that he sees coming out of the interviews. And I just want to give you a few takeaway messages because I think they are relevant for today's discussions. One is that there's a very strong momentum coming out of the IPCC sixth assessment report towards more action on climate and disastrous finance, and the paper really goes into the details on what are some of the highlights of the IPCC, then also comprehensively mapping the CDFI architecture. I don't expect you to read the picture on the left of the slide, but looking at all the different programs that already exist. And what you can see is that a lot of it has a direct, the UNFCCC has a direct realm over it, but also a lot of it is happening outside of the convention process. And in order to increase action overall, we need to reach out to these actors out of the UNFCCC. We also have to think broader. We have to reel in the humanitarian community. There are questions around accessibility and delivery, and whether principles, the PUPRO principles, for example, of the IGP, are applied overall. There are also questions around coherence of how different programs can work together and actually are delivering a comprehensive package, especially towards V20 countries. So questions around complementarity as well, and also competition, unfortunately. There are also questions around true ownership, and I think we will probably also focus on that in the discussions. For example, representation of affected countries in this CDFI architecture, and also subsidiarity. So the question on what are the national level mechanisms to implement. And then also linking it to broader conversation. I think this discussion has been very much championed through the V20 group, but questions around what are we going to do with non-economic losses, what are we going to do with slow onset events, and how does it also link to the broader financial system questions we have, what is about debt risks and debt that is partially to be explained through increased climate vulnerabilities. Some of the immediate milestones for this year towards COP27 that were discussed by the experts is, for example, the operationalization of the Santiago network, and I think we will talk about that. We have the Glasgow dialogue that happened over the past 2 days, and we have the question around the loss and damage financing facility that has been called for at COP26, and that is a call by especially the developing countries. We are talking about the Inter-Resilience Global Partnership and the Resilience and Sustainability Trust and the outcome of the conversations that happened a few months ago. We are talking about the Bali Agenda for Resilience. That's the UNDRR outcome 2 weeks ago, which has very concrete points on the discussions of today and might serve as a blueprint also for some of the conversations that are happening at COP27. And then lastly, also some concrete points for the German G7 presidency. About 4 weeks ago, there was a development ministerial, and one of the decisions was to work towards a global shield. And there are also, like Sara already mentioned that, but there are some components to that. So how can this be further operationalized? What kind of signal is coming out of the Heads of State Summit end of June, and so on. The document concludes with overall 13 policy recommendations. I'm not going into the details of these policy recommendations right now, but just to encourage you, we'll provide you with a link, and we also have a few hard copies kindly prepared by my team for you available in the room. Okay, good. With that, I hope we have somewhat of a reference, and I would now like to transition to the panel discussion with my three panelists. And I'm also going to put on the room slides. And before I do that, I would like to introduce actually the last member on the panel. So Emmanuel Tachie-Obeng from Ghana, the Environmental Protection Agency. Ghana recently assumed the CVF and V20 presidency, and he will reflect from that perspective. We also invited Isatou Camara from the Ministry of Finance in the Gambia, but unfortunately she has urgent business within the negotiations. So this is like, unfortunately, how side events go if you do them in parallel to the negotiations. So I will also ask Sara, Jane, Ahmed to jump in with some of the V20 perspectives when it comes to more the technical level. Yeah. Okay. Good. So the first segment of our discussion looks at key concerns around climate and disastrous finance. So thinking about what are some of the most pressing issues, what are some of the most pressing concerns. So Sara already mentioned the report that was launched yesterday. And also what are some of the areas where the panelists like to see progress. And Emmanuel, you haven't said anything so far, so I'll probably start with you if that's okay. Ghana has recently assumed the V20 presidentship and CVF presidency. And you also, I guess, read the report from that Sara presented. So where do you see, or how would you see the key concerns of CVF and V20 countries?
Yeah, thank you very much, Soenke. I'm very happy to meet you this afternoon. And then I also welcome all of you here this afternoon as a new presidency so far as CVF and V20 is concerned. When it comes to key concerns so far as climate disaster risks finance is concerned, as a presidency, we see it that scaling up of financial protection, as mentioned by Sara, is one major issue which we really need to note it. Also, prioritizing South-South and country-originated activities is very, very, very important. And then the effort of the vulnerable countries reducing their high costs. I'm talking about high capital costs, which is resulting to increase in debt, among other things, is also a big issue. I'll go in details on that. And finally, the vulnerable countries has also decided to do their what we call the climate prosperity plan. You see, if you look at the NDCs allow country to become adapted to the climate change impacts, and then also it also reduce emissions. But vulnerable countries would like to go beyond vulnerability to resilience to prosperity. So we are not only going to adapt, but we'll add to prosperity so far as our vulnerability is concerned. So I will first of all welcome you here. As it has been already said, I would like to echo that Ghana is very pleased to have taken the mantle from Bangladesh as a chair of the CVF and then the V20 presidency. A couple of weeks ago, specifically on 25th of May, Bangladesh handed over the baton to His Excellency Nana Akufo-Addo, the President of Ghana, to really, on a very colorful ceremony for the CVF, and in October, we'll also do a similar ceremony for the V20, so far as the climate vulnerable countries are concerned. So I'm pleased that the new study of V20, which has been presented by Sara, put forward an alarming new DORA figures in the economic losses of climate change in most vulnerable countries, because we're initially finding it difficult to put cash on disasters. But we are happy this afternoon that V20 has been able to do that. And it's really specifically indicate that over $500 billion of US dollars is usually gone. It means that about 20% of our wealth is off due to climate losses and damages alone. So this is really serious so far as climate vulnerable countries are concerned. And we need to do whatever we can to do that. And that is what I mentioned. Some of the things we want to do, V20 together with G7 and then the G20, who are the great emitters, and they are the only people, the rich countries who are the only people that can help us. So we really need to scale financial protection efforts, as I've already mentioned, to reduce climate fuel risks for governments, for micro, for small, medium-sized enterprises and communities. This is very, very important. If we don't reduce these risks, our debts are going to increase. And current domestic public funds are also inefficient to deal with this impact. So we really need all these developing countries to come and support us to really speed, scale, and actually enhance international financial resources. And then also from private sector, when I'm talking about private sector, I'm talking about pre-arranged funds for financial protection. This should be supported by capacity building. As you know, most developing countries are also lack with capacity building. So we need this financial protection effort together with capacity building to help us ensure effective delivery. The second aspect that I mentioned is on prioritizing South-South and country-originated activities. If you're able to do that, climate risks, respect to loss and damage will go a long way to be enhanced. This includes the sustainable insurance facility. Most of our climate wealth are being driven away without any insurance. So that is very, very important. We need to really have a sustainable insurance facility which aims at making available climate smart insurance for, like I say, medium, small scale and other enterprises as a crucial growth of engine for the V20 economies. And at this juncture, I'm using it to actually applaud the German BMX. German BMX has been able to give us a seed fund to start all these processes. And I'm very, very happy to hear that. The V20 is also pioneering its own small way of a program on loss and damage as a way of demonstrating the potentials that exist to provide meaningful financial support for loss and damage. It means that we intend to initiate result from to present initial results of this report before we go to COP27. We hope that it will help us to inspire the new global funding mechanism, which we are all looking for it, so far as loss and damage is concerned. And then I will also like to talk on the high cost of capital, which I've already mentioned, because it really become hurdles, and it is not currently preventing our adaptation effort, delaying our resilience, and then also declining our sustainable development goals. V20 economies should not be therefore penalized, growing climate risks that ultimately leads to high economic loss. I've already mentioned it. High economic loss impairs our adaptation and resilient investment, access to low-cost financial capital can therefore improve debt sustainability, which will go a long way to enable our sustainable resilient investment to succeed. The cost of capital issue will therefore contribute to the financial protection gap. We therefore hope that G7 and G20 can act on this line. The V20 developed the climate financing mechanism in order to provide off-balance sheet guarantees to deal with this issue. This is the next big opportunity that we are expecting the G7 and the V20 to really work on that. And like I said, the final aspect that we really want, so far as loss and damage is concerned, I'm talking about loss and damage finance is concerned, is to develop our own prosperity plan. And this is what each of the countries are doing. Though Ghana started from 25th of May, we've really initiated our loss and damage, which was actually brought by our predecessor, Bangladesh. Bangladesh is preparing it now. Marshall Island is preparing, and Ghana has also started. And we hope that most of the vulnerable countries will prepare this climate prosperity plan, which will help us to move from vulnerability to prosperity, as I have already indicated. And I hope that this will be able to chart a pathway that will build forward better through articulation of investment opportunity for financing. This is really, we are going to outline activities that will help us, for us also to prosper. And it's also going to support through the global shield that can play a very important role to minimize our socioeconomic outcomes within the climate prosperity agenda that I'm talking about. So these four concerns are on our hearts, as I've already mentioned. Reducing capital costs, building our own climate prosperity plan, and then trying to scale up financial protection and also prioritize South-South and country-originated activity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emmanuel, and not only for laying out some of the key concerns, but also really some of the priorities for the Ghanaian CVF and B20 presidency. It's quite impressive to see, and of course, happy to collaborate on that and see this becoming reality. I want now to ask Denise, if that's okay for you. So you are representing ICSC. ICSC is an organization from the Philippines, and you really have also some of the frontline views. Also, you are a member of the high-level consultative group of the Inter-Resilience as the academic and think tank representative. So you have quite some deep engagement on the topic, and so I ask you, what are some of the key concerns from your perspectives?
Thank you, Soenke. Yes, just over a week ago, we at ICSC, as you know, convened in Bali, representatives of government agencies and CSOs from the Philippines, Lao PDR, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka. Our workshop was held on the sidelines of the UN Global Disaster Risk Reduction Platform, and under this initiative that we're working with MCII and other partners, called the Multi-Stakeholder Partnership on Climate and Disaster Risk Financing and Preparedness in the context of the Inter-Resilience Global Partnership, or MAPS. So aside from the Philippines, we are also joined by CSOs from Laos, Sri Lanka, Malawi, Madagascar, Senegal, Caribbean, and of course, Germany. So the main call of our participants in Asia is really to make climate finance pro-poor, equitable, and people-centered. We know that initiatives such as CDRFI, or Climate and Disaster Risk Finance, and insurance are even more crucial now following the findings of the V20 in its L&D report, as Sara shared earlier, and the IPCC. The AR6 projects stronger tropical storms in Southeast Asia and more frequent and intense heat waves in South Asia, among other impacts. yet the uptake of CDRFI among vulnerable countries, including in Asia, remains low. What we have found out in our work in ICSC, even in the local and national levels, is that countries must be ready with their own needs-based products and instruments on climate and disaster risk finance and insurance to be able to tap into initiatives such as IGP. And the same can be said for the global architecture. So what we found out from our initiatives in tracking adaptation and mitigation, even disaster finance, we found that the Philippines has at least half of its adaptation finance pre-allocated for immediate response and reconstruction after disasters. Certainly, the reactive nature of financing will not work and is unsustainable, since the cost of not doing anything will always be more than the cost of investing now. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I like to follow up on the last point, because climate and it's not only climate and disasters finance we are talking about as a key expectations towards COP27. It's also general climate finance in which we have to coach our discussion. So I like to follow up on that point. But before I do that, Sara, you are facilitating quite a bit of work with the V20 group of finance ministers, and you really have like deep insights into their concerns. Could you give us also a little bit of a rundown where you see of some of the priorities of the group moving forward?
Thank you, Soenke. Yeah, I mean, just to build off of Emmanuel's points on financial protection, key constraints include affordability, investment barriers as well, ensuring that there is indeed a marketplace for these tools to prosper, and ensuring that we can generate market scale and internal momentum to build these markets that can actually manage risk. But in terms of other pressing concerns, I think if we look at the last V20 ministerial dialogue, it was clear, our key message there is that the global financial architecture has to become climate smart, let's say. And so this means that we need to be looking at longer investment horizons. We need to be really focusing on the cost of capital, which Emmanuel focused on as an issue, because this limits adaptation prospects, because it is it's a high capital expenditure. And the other point, I think, is that we need to be looking at a layered approach, looking at adaptation, looking at loss and damage tools, looking at how best the existing architecture can coordinate and fill in the gaps. And with that, we could better understand where the gaps lie. The V20 is also looking into filling risk modeling and data gaps through a global risk modeling alliance. This is quite major because we need to be ensuring that we're driving investment to where vulnerability is located. And the way to do that is through data and science. Yeah, so I mean, it's quite a, I guess, a large undertaking, but I think high-level point is we have the market participants, public sector and private sector in place, and we need to ensure that we make them fit for climate.
Okay, excellent, Sara. And I think with that we more or less have all points together in terms of what are the priorities indeed for the V20 group and vulnerable countries. I now want to focus a little bit on the expectations towards individual actors and processes and also institutions in the near future, while we try to accelerate action towards COP27. And maybe I'm again handing over to you, Emmanuel, if that's okay. So we really have seen that Egypt is making COP27 a priority, also a priority for the African continent. Quite a strong narrative for resilience coming out of COP27. And importantly, it has argued that climate finance needs to be on the top of the agenda. The CVF and the V20, they have done a ministerial 2 months ago on the sidelines of the World Bank and IMF meeting, where generally these ministerials take place. Can you maybe give us a few expectations also coming out of the ministerial declaration?
Yeah, thank you very much, Soenke. Again, as you have already indicated, COP27 is Africa COP, and then it's also an adaptation COP. And as you know, we can only adapt by going hand in hand with the financial institutions. So we can't really leave them. So the IMF and then the World Bank, African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, among other financial institutions that the V20 conveys is a critical space for the delivery of resources, because they are the people who go a long way to depend to have the funds. Apart from the financial mechanism in place, the Green Climate Fund among, Adaptation Fund among, they are the institutions that the money will come from them. So financial impact of climate risks actually threatens the V20 country debts, sustainability, and then our development resources. If you don't have the risks, is really destroying our economies. And this is very, very important. So I'm stressing here again that we need the IMF, we need the World Bank to contribute to the special financial assistance or something like a crisis support to really help us go beyond loss and damage. That means that they all have to be part of the solution. It is not vulnerable countries' problem, but it's a problem of all, both financial institutions and then the vulnerable countries. So I'm happy to hear the outcomes of the V20 loss and damage finding program to come out with this report. And I believe that is going to be a very pragmatic way forward and a contribution to the global shield that the G7 and then the G20 are working on currently. And I'm glad that the B20 is also able to contribute to the formation of this, and specifically including the governance so far as financial institutions are concerned. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have to dive a bit deeper on the global sheet discussions. But before we do that, I ask you, Denise, with this general call for climate finance and climate finance being a priority topic for COP27, you are an organization from the Global South. Can you give us a little bit of your general expectations on the topic?
This time of multiple crises of not just on climate, but also debt, health, and even on food and fuel. I think for ICSC, it's still worth stressing that we are not all on the same boat, that we might be in the same ocean of crises, but certainly some are just merely clinging to debris in a vast sea of uncertainty. We join the calls of the CVF, V20, and other vulnerable countries in calling on rich countries to deliver on their commitments to climate action here in Bonn, certainly, and the G7 summit in Elmau, and COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. We joined the V20 in calling on the G7 and G20 and the World Bank and IMF to adopt a more equitable approach to resolving these current crises for a global financial system that, as Sara said, is fit for climate prosperity. We know insurance mechanisms, initiatives such as the IGP are just one part of what must be a concerted effort of developed countries to provide new and additional funding for climate action. And loss and damage, which has been, of course, a priority over the last few days, is just one component of this. Developed countries can commit to existing climate funds, especially the GCF. They can provide premium and capital support following the principles of resilience. For sure, they must promote country-driven plans by supporting needs-based and demand-driven processes and decision-making. Likewise, it is time for developed countries to stop over-reporting their climate finance contributions. In the Philippines alone, it is estimated that around 37% of its adaptation tagged finance is over-accounted by its sources of international climate funds, which are dominantly, of course, rich countries.
Yeah, thank you for that point. And I would now also again ask Sara. You have been involved in the discussions of the Global Shield, of the Inter-Resilience Global Partnership, and the G7 processes. Can you give us a little bit of insights how you see, how you would judge the progress that was achieved, but also what are some of the necessary next steps from a V20 perspective?
Thank you, Soenke. So as you know, it is in process, and there is working groups and engagement with the V20 on this, and I think this is the spirit of the Global Shield and the Inter-Resilience Global Partnership, is to have vulnerable countries on the table. IGP has multi-stakeholder grouping, and this is really important for perspectives as well as ensuring that the outcomes go further into protecting the interests of the world's most vulnerable groups, as well as the planet. So I hope that this could be a good contribution, considering that it is ministries of economy, finance, and development that are working on this. And so it would be looking not just at the context of loss and damage in the UNFCCC sense, but also in terms of macroeconomic sense, looking at micro, meso, sovereign solutions. And so it's really, I think, an important coordination tool that could be an important, process of collaboration this year. And we know we need to upscale efforts, as Emmanuel highlighted, 2022 and 2023. And I think now that there is a coordinated approach to this, with thanks to these evolving partnerships, we can assume a more robust global financial response to the crisis. I hope that answers your.
Thank you. I do have a follow-up question, and I think one of the crucial points is also that of participation of the V20 group, moving forward discussions under the Global Shield, but also generally the vulnerable country perspectives and participation of vulnerable country perspectives in global financial reform. Do you have some views and elaborations on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we know that representation of vulnerable countries in global governance remains weak. And this is where we can learn from and build on examples like the Inter-Resilience Global Partnership as one case that has both G20, V20 members as well as other representation. This is missing in a lot of other institutions or funding processes. And I think we should also understand that the V20 represents climate vulnerable economies. Most of the countries actually are net importers of fossil fuels, and so there's high exposure to fuel volatility, food security issues, and so global supply chains are also at risk, and so their perspectives do matter when it comes to coming up with solutions.
Okay, sweet. Thanks. Okay, I would now want to also tie this back to the discussions that are happening at the Bonn Climate Conference. The past 2 days, the Glasgow dialogue happened on supporting loss and damage, and this has been the compromised formula in the discussions happening at COP26 in Scotland at the end of last year. This questions goes to all panelists. Do you have already some first impressions on how the Glasgow dialogue went over the past 2 days? Just a little bit of context. The Glasgow dialogue is also going to take place in the coming 2 years at the Bonn SBs, and of course is an important input into COP27 and beyond. So my question would be, what are your impressions of the ongoing discussions under the Glasgow dialogue, and maybe also more broadly on the topic of financing arrangements and financial commitments when it comes to averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. And I'm not sure, Emmanuel, you want to do the start?
Yeah, thank you very much. When it comes to the ongoing dialogue, the emphasis that I would like to place, since we are actually talking about the loss and damage report, I'm going to place a lot of emphasis on the highlights that this report came out with, which is going to guide us so far as our discussions are concerned. If you look at the report, is actually giving us or telling us the injustice of a situation where most extreme cases, half of our world is lost, as we mentioned earlier. And this is what our discussion should be directed towards, because of loss and damage, most of our wealth are going, our debt is going to be increased, and we need to direct, or this should really guide us on what we are doing here. Another also issue that I would like to also mention that is going to also highlight or direct our discussion is when you talk about the warming. The report also mentioned about warming, that we have already warmed 1 degree. It's already gone. And we are speedily heading towards the 1.5, which will be climbed for all over. And our losses, if you are going, we've already beyond 1 and moving towards 1.5. It means that our losses is not only going to be accelerated, but is going to be compounded. Our situation is going to be disaster. And mitigation commitments are also directed toward 2 degrees. This is also one of the issues which I would like the negotiators here to really think about. And the worst of all, the existing policies and actions are, if even implemented, are also going to lead us into 3 degrees, as the IPCC is also linked to. So these issues are very, very key as a follow-up to the Glasgow dialogue, and then also to what we are discussing here. This will actually not going to be a workable situation so far as the global economy, food security, and energy security is concerned. And this is our task over here in Bonn, to build on this information, and then also with the IPCC, and make sure that our discussions, our negotiations are directed towards these actions, and specifically placing much emphasis on the vulnerable countries' economy. So now this report therefore gives us a hope. I see that it's going to be inspired as a new global funding mechanism for loss and damage. This is where our report, loss and damage, was initiated during our COP26, and this I see is really going to enhance it so far as our discussion here in Bonn is concerned. And as part of this dialogue here in this section, I'm looking forward of hearing perspectives from countries' representatives on environment, climate, and foreign ministers to really talk on this, link IPCC, link the V20 report, and come out with the warming issue, the injustice issue, and then even one important thing, which also came out from this report, is the ejection of the vulnerable countries by the G20 and then the G7. Our commitments are not being coming out as expected. So this is also another important issue. And then the need to continue discussion on the delivery plan is very, very important, which will guide our discussion here. And to close everything, we look forward for the V20 loss and damage funding program to deliver financial protection and then climate justice outcomes. So like I initially discussed, that it's going to be a hope, or it's going to inspire us to direct our discussion so far as the vulnerable countries are concerned. And then we are looking up to that also as a solidarity with victims least responsible and the least equipped to withstand these increasingly extremely physical shocks of climate change where we are going through as vulnerable countries. So please, as we are going through our negotiation, and then as we are following up our outcomes of COP26, let this be our direction. Let this be the future, for the future, or for the prosperity, or to reduce the vulnerability of vulnerable countries. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I turn to you, Denise. Also, you've been part of the Glasgow dialogue over the past 2 days. What are your perspectives and impressions?
Like Emmanuel, here I want to respond in the context of the V20 report we launched yesterday. This breakthrough report is not just about the incredible wealth destruction and massive pain inflicted on the poor. It also underscores the inequitable burden that vulnerable countries have had to carry in response to the impacts of a fast-changing climate that these countries are least responsible for. Given how the Glasgow dialogue and the formal negotiations are going, rich countries seem determined to deprioritize loss and damage, even as they continue to pass on the funding burden to vulnerable countries, who to this day have had no choice but to continue to pay for the consequences of avarice among the wealthy. We join the calls of vulnerable countries for their developed counterparts to deliver new and additional finance for loss and damage within the UNFCCC. The way developed countries have shirked their responsibility over this crisis is obscene. Thank you, Soenke.
Thanks. I mean, if I look at how the discussions went at the Glasgow dialogue, there was a lot of questions around labeling, whether we are talking, for example, around mitigation finance, adaptation finance, and indeed loss and damage finance, how this can be generated. But we were also talking about some of the topics we are well aware and confronted with in the climate and disastrous financing space. For example, accessibility, part of the discussions last year under the insurance indeed were the questions around premium support and capital support in general, and this is also part of the outcome of the G7. So very much also questions around delivery. I want to turn to you, Sara, again, because you really have, like, as a finance advisor, the general overview. And where do you see gaps in the discussions that happened under the Glasgow dialogue? Where do you want to see more emphasis, maybe also in future iterations of the Glasgow dialogue?
So in addition to the finance issue, which I think was already highlighted by Emmanuel and Denise, I think we also have to consider prepared institutions. nationally and internationally, prepared to absorb the financing to deploy in a cost-effective and efficient manner. Because timing is also quite critical when we think about loss and damage, resources being delivered to those most vulnerable. So I think part of what needs to happen is to ensure that we build these prepared institutions nationally, subnationally, and also through current international and regional mechanisms that exist, so that we can just scale up what we have and also make it more fit for purpose to deal with the extent of the crisis.
Okay, thanks. Before I ask for questions from the audience and also hopefully questions online, I would like to ask you, moving forward from the Glasgow dialogue, we are also looking at a package at COP27. I think not all of it is clear, but there's already some emerging elements. And so I would ask you, maybe again starting with you, Emmanuel, what are your key expectations for COP27 and beyond?
Yeah, from what we discussed all over, climate finance, where the emphasis will not only be placed on loss and damage, generally climate finance is a big problem, which I'm hoping that COP27 will work on it. And then also the 1.5 degrees reach is also a major problem, as this report has revealed, that we've already reached 1 degree, speedily heading towards 2, and even if our policies and actions are implemented, we'll be heading towards 3 degrees, and where will the developing vulnerable countries will be? So the 1.5 degree reach is also a major issue which we also need to really consider in our deliberations so far as the COP27 is concerned. And then adaptation. Adaptation is a major issue, because if the patterns are going like this, as IPCC has indicated, then we really need to adapt and become resilient. And if you are adapting and become resilient, then we should not also forget loss and damage, which we have already mentioned. Loss and damage should be very crucial. What was initiated in COP26 need to be taken up in COP27. So at the end, and then with the report of the V20, we are hoping to have a loss and damage financial program. So this is what we are hoping for. At least I've mentioned about 5 or 6, and I think I will leave it for my colleagues to continue. Thank you.
Okay. We heard that COP27 has to continue where COP26 left us. Denise, what are your key expectations?
Our expectations for COP27 are clear. Are to demonstrate delivery promises, show implementation in the 2020s. Certainly, we cannot wait for the Glasgow dialogue, for example, on loss and damage to wrap up in 2023 before we see financing. And third, to define an adequate political response to the continuous urgency for action in light of the latest IPCC science, and even, of course, this latest V20 report. The ministerials that are still upcoming, Elmau and Petersburg, even the MEF, these are all opportunities to link to the formal negotiation issues and demonstrate actions to prove that the acceleration of global climate action and shared commitment to deliver on promises from Glasgow.
Mm-hmm. And now, last but not least, Sara, you also have like an overview about the wider financial agenda and also the milestones happening this year and even next year. And so within that, where do you see COP27 fitting in? What needs to be achieved by COP27 and due to COP27?
Thanks, Soenke. So just building off of the V20 ministerial meeting from 2 months ago now, it was clear from the V20 that they're seeking multilateral financing institutions for specificity in the commitment to climate investment in order to deliver a doubling of adaptation within the next 30 months, and for climate portfolios to be at least 50% climate adaptation. So what this means for the COP, and as called for by the V20, in addition to the delivery plan which was submitted in the last COP, to have an implementation plan so that this, the direction of finance, which institutions are also clear, because this also then determines access arrangements. And this is a concerted effort. It's finance ministries also should be on the table as we try to deliver better access arrangements, but also ensure absorptive capacity is there to deliver to adaptation and resilience investments.
Okay, good. So I think we covered quite a bit of ground, going from the need to some of the concrete instruments and initiatives, and also commenting on how these are faring, and then tying this back to the UNFCCC here in Bonn, but also looking for, towards the Egyptian COP at the end of the year. I would now want to open the side event also to questions here in Bonn, but also possibly questions online to the panel generally on the topics we discussed, but also or specifically on the topics that we discussed, but also more broadly on the V20 financing agenda. And I have a colleague with a microphone. And also people monitoring, I guess, the online stream. Excellent. Thank you for breaking the ice.
Hi. Thank you very much for very informative panel discussion. My name is Nagisa Shiba from the Institute for Global Environmental Strategy in Japan. So, sorry, I just want to raise the agenda different from the Glasgow dialogue, but as you are aware, there is an ongoing discussion on global goal on adaptation. This agenda is basically about how we can assess the progress of the adaptation at the global scale. My point is, within this framework, how we can capture the extent of which the most vulnerable groups or people are socially or financially protected. So if you have any implication from the perspective of the climate and disaster finance, I just want to hear about your thoughts because, so far there is the many ideas on the table, and there is no clear indicator or element to be included into the global goal on adaptation. So, yeah, I just want to hear from your idea. Thank you.
That's an excellent question. I pass this on to the panel. Do you have any views on the global goal on adaptation, the work program that is currently happening? I also have to add, this is the first session that we're also looking into the global stocktake and the technical input papers prepared for that. One of the elements is looking into the state of adaptation. So we already have, in a way, the first cycle of looking at the global progress on adaptation. And so are there any thoughts? Maybe also a translation could be, there is already an existing indicator framework for climate and disaster risk finance. The Vision 2025 looks, for example, at the level of people covered through financial instruments, ex-ante financial instruments, but also microinsurance. There are also questions around disaster risk financing strategies, countries being covered through such strategies. So do you have any pointers or, that are relevant for global stock taking on adaptation progress, and also thinking about global goal on adaptation? Who wants to take that question?
Well, thank you again for breaking the ice, as Soenke said. We do work with IHS, I know, on the independent global stock take, and we do believe that we should have the parties here communicate views on how that global stock take process links to other ongoing processes here in the climate talks. That includes the global goal, that includes the Glasgow dialogue, and the new post-2025 finance goal, and even the mitigation work program. I'll leave it to my other panelists here if they want to add something.
Yeah, let me add a bit to what Denise said. If you look at the climate vulnerable countries, we are trying to also assess the progress of adaptation of our vulnerable countries, and we have a tool which we call the Climate Vulnerable Monitor, and we are doing this to provide data to the global goal of adaptation. So this is one effort that we are doing. We assess the finance that these countries has received, because vulnerable countries, when it comes to Green Climate Fund, some of them, as of today, have not received even 1/4 of what they are expecting for. So we are, in order to achieve this global goal on adaptation, we are trying to get this data in terms of assessing of finance, in terms of implementation of their adaptation actions, in order to have a full complement of the objectives of the adaptation goal. So this is what we, as a vulnerable country, are doing. Our third climate vulnerable monitor is almost out, and you can look at it within the net, and this is really going to go a long way to support the whole idea of a global goal on adaptation, so far as vulnerable countries are concerned. Thank you very much.
Any additional perspectives, or good enough?
No, I think that makes sense, and I guess the other point, just to reiterate from the report, it shows that adaptation needs to significantly upscale, and so hopefully this GGA, as Emmanuel mentioned, would be considering the outcomes of the Climate Vulnerability Monitor 3rd edition, just so that we are matching and precision channeling investments and resources to vulnerability.
Thank you, and I think my feeling would be that right now the discussions are not that concrete, that countries first have to, for example, think about also the level of the global goal on adaptation, what kind of information goes into it. I think it's important that it also has an element of global responsibility, not only contextualizing adaptation as a local phenomenon. And I think the question around, for example, adaptation investments and adaptation finance also still to be debated on how this can be featured in the global goal on adaptation. Are there any more questions from the audience? Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your wonderful discussion. My question would be like, many countries, like the developing countries like Afghanistan and Haiti, they didn't receive the climate adaptation funds. And as I know, Afghanistan has been one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change as well, despite the decades of conflicts. And I don't know like whether such kind of, like the food insecurity is very high. People have been displaced a lot, and climate change and conflict both are combinedly working and displacing the people. And I think if such kind of situation continues without support, such as the climate adaptation projects and programs, I think this situation will be worsening and worsening day by day, and there will be more people displacing and migrating to other countries. So now with the political collapse of the political system collapse in the country, and there is no such kind of setup, and I think they don't have the capacity. So in such kind of situation, what would be your reflections to on this? Like there will be like, yeah, gaps and challenges, but what would be your reflection not considering such kind of situation in terms of climate finance and adaptation funds?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Could you also quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm one of the students, not recently graduated from the UNU-EHS, and also working voluntarily with UNMJCY.
Okay, thank you. I'm directly passing this on. So one of the questions is a fragile context, and I think with that also comes the question on how, what's the role of the humanitarian system, expectations towards that, but also a question around displacement and relocation, and how this can be captured and captured as part of COP27. So, who wants to take that? Emmanuel, first mover. Thanks.
Yeah, let me start this question because it's very sad that the most vulnerable countries tend to be the most countries who doesn't actually receive funds on their climate actions at all, and this is very, very pathetic. And the problem is it may be due to expertise, because if you look at the Green Climate Funds, you need to set an institution, you need to have expertise to come out with the proposals. They need to be in-country review, no objection. All those things are done in country before it is sent to the GCF. So if the capacity is not there, it becomes a problem. If the institution is not there, it becomes a problem. If the data is not there, it becomes a problem. So these have been the major, which is these are very common problems with developing countries. Mm-hmm. So these problems goes with the access or inaccessibility of funds. So because of this, the climate vulnerable countries, as I mentioned, are going in a different way to access these funds. What we are doing is having the Climate Prosperity Plan. This plan is being developed where funds could be accessed regionally, maybe about 2, 3, or transboundary. Countries with weaker capacity can link up with other countries, other vulnerable countries with a stronger capacity, and access the funds in such a way that whatever comes will be something that will go through everybody. So this is one major way that we want to assess the funds, by writing composite proposals in such a way that more countries will have access to it, because we are going with a bigger strength. So that bigger strength will help us get the funds. And then also, we are going with vulnerable. See, if you look at GCF, they consider vulnerability. So we are going with the highest vulnerability, the least among everybody. See, they have a list, developed countries, and coming for funds, so they will be considered first. So this is a strategy for us to be known and considered first, and then at the end of the day, we'll be able to access more funds. So we are going to identify ourselves as vulnerability, and this time link our vulnerability to prosperity. So it's one strategy that we are going to use. If most countries are, maybe by end of this year, like I mentioned, as at now, 3 countries are working on it, and most of the countries have also shown interest. And we have a little funds to support these countries to come out with the climate prosperity plan. And this will be a very good strategy to rake in a lot of countries who are still not being able to get enough of the funds that are available for climate change to get it by going with strength, by going with our vulnerability. So this is one of the ways we are using to help us assess the fund, so that the issue of data, issue of capacity, or issue of information and all those things will be the thing of the past, so far as climate vulnerable countries are concerned. Thank you very much.
Okay, Denise, do you have any perspectives on especially the migration topic?
Well, Afghanistan is actually a part of the Climate Vulnerable Forum and the Vulnerable 20 group. And it's good that the CVF, now led by Ghana, of course, is one of the leading groups within the Global South that are driving the call for increased international support to reduce displacement in the Global South via the Dhaka-Glasgow Declaration held in Glasgow in COP26. Of course, we know that climate change exists as a critical driver of mass migration. And then, of course, when you factor in conflict, that's so many convergences, of course, so interlapping crises this year especially. And the figures I have here now show that by 2050, 2.5 billion people are projected to be living in cities, and 1.2 billion people are projected to be driven to abandon their homes because of climate impacts. So certainly climate-driven migration will have far-reaching consequences across various global policy arenas. But while the global community is increasingly recognizing the interconnection of climate and migration, actions until now have not delivered the needed recognition for adequate preparations for and response to climate-related migration. So it does need to be, migration, needs to be better integrated, certainly, in the global climate agenda. And one part of the solution is certainly to increase funding for adaptation, to unlock access to funds for cities which are hotspots of climate impacts and are the front lines of climate-related displacements.
Okay, nice. Sara.
Thanks, Soenke. Yeah, just to cite the Minister of Economy and Finance from the Republic of Haiti. He mentioned during the ministerial the need to promote partnerships between international financial institutions, private sector. And this is not because of just finance, but also having the right skills to ensure that we get the preferred outcomes, both on the development side and climate side. And in terms of the question on climate-fueled migration, it's pretty clear that climate has repercussions across various issues: food, power, migration, and so it's important. I think it actually doubles the urgency to deal with the crisis. The CVF, I believe, is also working on a migration component to deal with this under the Presidency of Ghana. And so this is something as well to look forward to as an input from the CVF.
Yeah, maybe also some personal reflections. I think the UNFCCC process has not been very good at especially addressing this intersection between fragile context and climate change, or to have like specific programs around that. But there are now activities starting, for example, under the work program of the Warsaw International Mechanism. There are expert groups. One is actually looking at the topic of displacement. And one of the tasks also going into COP27 is to issue technical guidance note. And so to really also have an authoritative voice on the topics, and I expect that displacement is also one of those, and working in fragile contexts is generally going to be a call for action towards COP27. Are there any additional questions? I'm looking also at you, Alex. No, nothing coming from the audience. Okay. Good. If that's all, battery ran down. I was hoping it would do for another 10 minutes, but I guess that's fine. I think a signal for me to provide the wrap up. So I would like to thank all the panelists, also especially Emmanuel for making the long way over and also prioritizing the side event. Very much appreciated. And in the beginning, I was saying I want to talk about the challenge, the why we are active on this, and Sara provided quite a few perspectives on it, also referencing the report that came out yesterday. We were also talking about what needs to happen in terms of the next steps, and also the concrete instruments. So how it needs to happen. In terms of the general outlook, I want to say that there are a few milestones we are looking forward to engage on, generally, also from a V20 perspective. And I think one is the general setup and follow-up on the Global Shield, also coming out, possibly coming out with further political momentum from the G7 summit at the end of June. But there are also additional milestones. I personally was quite intrigued by the outcome of the Bali agenda, so the summit of the Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction that happened two weeks ago in Indonesia, and there are like really rich points in the outcome document of the summit, and there's also the commitment by the Indonesian host party to mainstream the Bali agenda for resilience in the G20. So we are also possibly seeing this topic being taken up by the G20 presidency, and with that some additional momentums, and of course the V20 making a strong call towards the fall meeting of the IMF and World Bank, and continuing to engage in the Inter-Resilience Global Partnership. And then lastly, maybe towards COP27, I think that also is somewhat of a personal feeling. We need to engage and advance on the technical level, but there also needs to be a political process and signal coming out of COP27. And so we like to see this topic being taken up by the Petersberg Dialogue, and also the pre-COP that actually sets the tone for success at COP27. And I hope these voices are taken into account in these discussions. Thank you to everyone. And I hope you have a few nice days in Bonn at the Climate Talk. Thanks.